All right, let's talk a little bit about water, specifically the burgeoning trend of the establishment of private water markets. And I'm just going to read this a little bit right here. Straight out of a Hollywood horror script, Citigroup economist Willem Boyder expects a world integrated derivatives market for fresh water to develop within 25 to 30 years that will eventually dwarf the market for oil and all other commodities. Specifically stating that, quote, there will be different grades and types of fresh water, just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today, end quote. You see, the financial con is not being destroyed. It is simply being rebranded with environmental talking points. And this is the sustainability economy that is being established. Um, it is being done under the guise of stopping man-made global warming slash climate change. But really, it's just the establishment of an infrastructure that will constitute the next phase in the economy. And you can even go to, say, books like this, Windfall, The Booming Business of Global Warming, where, I mean, this author he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about insofar as the context of what he is writing. However, if you understand the broader context of the agenda that is being put into place, and then you read some of what this guy has to say, he's basically explaining it to you. He's saying, look, there are all of these business opportunities happening right now because of and in response to quote unquote global warming. Um, and through that lens, you can see how how it's just a different phase in economic development, right? Using all of this flowery language coming out of the United Nations about eradicating poverty and everything that goes along with that. Saving the planet, right? Who can argue with saving the planet? So just going back to Willem Boyder, for the rest of what we'll talk about, this is really important. Once the spot markets for water are integrated, and the spot markets are just the real-time pricing of any commodity. So once the spot markets for water are integrated, futures markets and other derivative water-based financial instruments, puts, calls, swaps, both exchange traded and OTC will follow. There will be different grades and types of fresh water, just the way we have light, sweet, and heavy sour crude oil today. Water as an asset class will, in my view, become eventually the single most important physical commodity based asset class, dwarfing oil, copper, agricultural commodities, and precious metals. Um, I mean, that's just a staggering statement to to uh, to consider. I mean, oil. Just think about how big the oil industry is, and this guy's telling you, look, man, water is going to end up being bigger than that. And think about oil is a uh, a price inelastic good, meaning because of the way that we use oil, it doesn't our consumption of it doesn't change with price increases. Um, well, at least it doesn't. God, it's been a long time since I studied economics, but if I remember correctly, um, price inelasticity just means that oil, because we have to put its derivative into our cars to drive, and operate other gas powered engines, we are not very sensitive to price changes. And you could see that in America just a few years ago when the price of oil went up to like, uh, it was like, oh man, I think $200 a barrel or something crazy like that. And we were paying $4 or $5, even in the Midwest for gas. And still, people didn't have a choice. Now, of course, you might cut back on frivolous trips or, stuff like that, but you still got to go to work every day. You still got to do everything that you normally do, and you're going to put the gas in your car either way. So that's what being something being price inelastic is. And so That's just oil. That's just driving. We're talking about water, which every single living being on the planet needs to, especially human beings, needs to live. I mean, we can't go more than a couple days without water. Um, so you can imagine that this will be the most inelastically associated good slash commodity that will have ever been quantified price wise. So you can imagine the potential for price gouging and just in making it artificially scarce when it otherwise wouldn't be artificially scarce. And I mean, they did the same thing with the bottled water racket, right? They all of these corporations, they what a scam. They, for the most part, bottle tap water and then sell it back to you at like 2,000 times the cost that it cost them to produce. And you're drinking what you could have got out of your tap anyway. And of course, the tap water is toxic. You know, no matter what filtration process they, you know, let's put it this way: you think the corporations making fucking Coke and Pepsi have your best interests in mind when they're bottling your water? You know, come on, Nestle. You know, the company that's giving you Oreos, they're gonna be filtering that tap water for you. Come on. um, but just going back to this Willem Boyder character, I think I'm pronouncing his name right. I don't know. But this guy just checks all of the boxes. He has been affiliated with all of these. He taught at Yale, went to the London School of Economics, worked for Goldman Sachs, um, Cambridge, worked for the Bank of England. I mean, this guy is heavily involved, contributor to the Financial Times, heavily involved in all things shady. And this is a great quote down here. From June 2009 till August 2011, he was professor of political economy at the Center for Economic Performance of the London School of Economics. In January 2010, Boyder joined Citigroup as chief economist, replacing Louis Alexander, who vacated the position to work with the U.S. Treasury 8 months prior. In an April 2009 blog post, Boyder had earlier described Citigroup as a conglomeration of worst practice from across the financial spectrum. So, yeah, this guy was writing about Citigroup as this terrible thing, and then gets the call, "Hey man, we need you to come over to Citigroup." Okay, here's your check. Yeah, I'll do that. And of course, a guy who was a international advisor at Goldman Sachs for 5 years isn't going to have a problem doing that, right? He knows the game, and that's how the whole thing functions in general. These people play their roles. And when they're in one role, like contributing to the Financial Times during the quote unquote financial crisis that was totally contrived and designed many years in advance, well, then he'll talk about, you know, he'll submit little written pieces to Iceland, right? And he'll say that he helped them clean up their banking industry. And then he'll talk about how Citigroup is this toxic place, just, totally corrupt. Oh, but then when he gets in the next role, yeah, now I'll actually go work for Citigroup and I'll play that role, right? And then I'll tell everyone how we're going to create a world water market with derivatives and everything that comes along with that. Um, just insanity. And it's just, and right, um, the former person that had this position, he goes to work for the U.S. Treasury, right? I mean, I don't need to tell you about base level stuff like the revolving door between these institutions and the government. I do think it's useful to remind everyone that these people are actors. They are. Now that doesn't mean that they didn't go to all of this schooling, and learn about these pseudosciences like economics. I mean, of course they would have to go through all of that to be able to make it seem like they know what they're talking about. But then they're still, when it comes to their ultimate positions and the things that they're actually talking about, they are actors in that way. They're reading a script. So sure enough, this article just recently came out. 1.2 million awarded to research projects to help Los Angeles County thrive despite climate change, developing smart grids, converting wastewater to freshwater, so you drink your shit, right? How wonderful. And studying the consequences of bike sharing among the projects, get you out of your cars, right? And then the smart grid, which doesn't really need an introduction. We all know that's coming. But so this article just talks about this grant and how they're going to be looking into all of these quote unquote sustainable initiatives. And this right here says it all. The Sustainable LA Grand Challenge is a university-wide research initiative to transition the Los Angeles region to 100% renewable energy, 100% local water, and enhance ecosystem health by 2050. Wow. And then there's all the buzzwords. This is an important step in making Greater Los Angeles sustainable. Man. So anyway, going down here, there's a bunch of. I will try to remember to link this. There's a bunch of crazy stuff in here, especially when you get down to here, where it reads all 250 community water systems in Los Angeles will have to work together for the region to shift to 100% local water. This project will create a feasible local water market for trading and selling county water resources with input from stakeholders. And of course, they don't say who the stakeholders are, but we know that these are all of these private sources that own the water rights, and more broadly, that will be the government in itself, because the government is the entity that is purchasing a lot of these water rights, under the guise of protecting the water system and ensuring that there will be water through drought like California is going through, or has been going through. But so it's coming, man. There it is. This is Southern California, especially, is where Agenda, whatever you want to view it, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050. I mean, whatever. It's the sustainability economy, and Southern California is where it's really starting. Now, of course, it's being implemented all across the world, and especially in America, in the major mega region metropolitan areas. I mean, it's being slowly put into place in all those areas, but California is being a generally liberal state. This is the place. I mean, well, just in general, California is really where a lot of trends start, and the liberal mind is more susceptible to the environmental propaganda. So this is the perfect place to introduce all of this stuff as a model for the rest of the country. So, what Willem Boyder, he's obviously an insider. He knows what's coming, and this is how you start it. You start it in these small. Well, Los Angeles is by no means small, but you start it in these small, relatively speaking, places, and then the model can be exported across the country. And there's all sorts of articles about this. Why water markets might work in California. Now, Australia actually has been doing this for a while now, and they had a drought of their own in the mid 2000s that stretched on for like 8 or 10 years, and so they integrated much of what Southern California is talking about doing right now. And this is a NPR interview with the guy that wrote Mackenzie Funk. He was the guy who wrote Windfall, Booming Business of Global Warming. And look at what he says here. It's just incredible. Well, first the question is, what are the other drawbacks for trying a system like this? And he's talking about he went down to Australia and kind of viewed how in the Murray-Darling River, um, how that system was functioning, which they described as a stock market for water. And he says, well, the most important good thing about it, before we talk about drawbacks, is that it puts a price on water. Now, remember what I was saying about what Willem Boyder said. Once the spot markets for water are integrated, then comes the futures markets and derivative water-based financial instruments. And of course, I don't need to tell you what happens when derivatives become involved in a commodity. It absolutely destroys. Eventually, it's a bomb that will go off and destroy the market. Right? It'll just look at. I mean, that's what they did in the housing market. Look at what they do in gold and silver. I mean, there's no actual price transparency in gold and silver. It's totally fabricated, made up by the exchanges. The spot price is nowhere near the reality. And that's what will happen to water as well. But you see the duplicity here, right? Once the spot markets for water are integrated. So first they have to do that. And that's what this guy is saying. Well, the most important thing about creating a stock market for water is that first, it puts a price on that water. In other words, it establishes the spot price. Well, and then then he tries to minimize the rest of it, right? And appeal to like traditional economic thought, and oh, that price signal says that you're not going to waste it as much as you might otherwise. Efficiency and all the other garbage that goes along with economics. And then he goes on to say the bad thing is that opening it up to the market, if you're not careful, means it goes to the highest bidder, which again is not even the real concern. It's the fact that through these programs, the local governments and regulatory structure will lose control of the supply of their own water, which is why they will say in other articles that it's better for the state governments to come in and make these regulations, just because, well, we'll get to that. It's in an article. So he says there's already water trading in California. It's just not a market like they set up in Australia. Blah, blah, blah. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, but that's part of what you got to do. You got to just pick out information from people who don't know what they're talking about and then assimilate it into the broader context that you've been able to discern from various different sources. So just let's see, where is that? This is just an article from the Wall Street Journal with the title, "The West Needs a Water Market to Fight Drought," blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what the article says because, now, surprise, surprise, the Wall Street Journal is advocating for this, right? Go figure, right? Okay, here's about the Australia initiative. So it goes on to say how, in response to the drought, they created this national water initiative to remove barriers to water trade. And of course, this is the reasoning they'll always give you, thus reducing market distortions and facilitating a freer trading process, right? The free market. And this is that Murray-Darling Basin Plan. It's kind of blah, blah, blah. There's really not. The part that I was really kind of taken aback by was this part down here. Unbundling of water rights. Historically, most states and territories bundled land property titles and associated water entitlements together. One of the National Water Initiative's objectives is to have a system in which water entitlements can be traded independently of land. This separation is known as unbundling land and water entitlements. Unbundling of land and water rights has been completed in many jurisdictions. Several jurisdictions are currently going through the process of unbundling water instruments. This means that water rights are unbundled from each other, as well as being unbundled from land. A bundled water instrument may contain a combination of water access entitlements, water supply works rights, and water use rights. An unbundled water instrument has only one water right. When trading water, it is important to note that unbundling of water rights is still being progressively implemented in some jurisdictions. So you can see what they're really talking about here is derivatives, because by unbundling the land and water rights from each other, and then even in addition to that, unbundling the different type of water instruments from each other, then you can combine them. Once they're separated, then these markets, these broker dealers can come in and start bundling up all these different water instruments from all over the country of Australia, and producing it as a product that can be sold, right? And then you can have, well, then you can have insurance on that water right going to zero, of all those different water rights going to zero, which is of course exactly what they did in America with the mortgage industry, um, where they bundled together all those shit, collateralized debt obligations, and sold them as if they were worth something, knowing they were worth nothing. Now, that's not to say that these water rights won't at first be worth something, but you got to understand that the groundwater is finite, and while it will replenish itself eventually, once you suck it dry, the land is for all intents and purposes useless as far as like agriculture or anything that would require water goes, right? I mean, who's going to want to move onto a property that has no water, where you can't even dig a well? So, and in that respect, when you go to, we'll see, and then of course this is an article from Bloomberg, which will say California's future is in Australia, and this is essentially what they're saying. They're trying to get California to adopt Australia's system, and Australia, of course, is a Crown Temple subsidiary, just like America. So it makes perfect sense that they would start this in Australia and then move it to Southern California, and then it'll move from there, right? And they're doing the same thing in Detroit also with this, like in Flint, Michigan, for example. Detroit has been purposely dismantled because it's going to be, in the next like 30, 40 years, it will become, in my opinion, I think this is obvious, it will become, together with Windsor, one of the first North American cities, right? It'll become one of the first United Nations cities. Which is why it was just intentionally demolished. So, of course, they'll come in and say California's worst in a century drought is forcing the state to impose strict limits on water use and to consider increasingly elaborate and expensive proposals to move water from here to there. And, of course, California passed a 25% reduction law where residential citizens had to cut their use of water by 25%. And this is just testing the water to see if the people will actually comply with it. You can imagine like a see something, say something variations where, the neighbors will tell on each other if they're using too much water, like, because people just have no clue what's happening to them. And there's videos out there of like the cities in California, in Southern California, just dumping gallons of water after a test while this was supposedly all going on. And while that's being passed, where was that? Where was that article? Oh, here it is. So while that was all going on, Nestle was still bottling and selling water in Southern California, like it was no big deal. The residents, have to cut their usage by 25% to this water rationing bill passed by Governor Jerry Brown or law. And meanwhile, Nestle, they just operate as if nothing's going on because they're above the law, right? They don't need to worry about that. Never mind the fact that, like I was saying earlier, that bottled water is a complete scam. You got them doing this while there's a supposed drought taking place. So where was I? This is just going over some of the. There really wasn't too much in that one. Here we go. And again, Bloomberg is just like the Wall Street Journal. Like they're appealing to this market rationality argument. Those steps may be necessary, but they should be accompanied by something more rational and efficient, that mechanism, of course, is the market. What they don't tell you, of course, is that the market for water has already been, the underlying infrastructure has already been bought up by um, by parties that are not, they're above the market. They make the market, right? These are the I don't even know how to describe them correctly, but these are they're the street muscle, right? These are the front men who go out and they are given the money to do what needs to be done, and then those names are the ones that you know that get the attention in the press in a negative way, like George Soros or the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds, whoever. Those are some of the like the more well-known versions of it. But there's all sorts of front men like that who are out there, doing this, and that's what they've been doing over the past few decades, buying up these water rights, and it's really an accelerating trend. Um, so that's what they tell you when they get to this point where the infrastructure is already largely in place. Of course, they own the governments that are regulating all of this stuff. Um, so really, when the government is, even if it's not one of these frontmen, the government, if they are buying the water rights on land, well, then of course, that's essentially the same thing because they control the governments. Um, so in that context, then they come down and say that mechanism, of course, is the market. When it comes to California's water, however, especially the 80% of it used in agriculture, the market is woefully inefficient. And then, that's problem, reaction, solution. How do we make it more efficient? Well, we remove all of the regulations that are currently in place to protect water at a local level or a state level, and we allow a stock market for water to be created, right? That's never gone wrong before. They just know that people have no attention spans. And, they're not going to remember that kind of stuff. And especially when it comes to something like this, where it's water, like then you can appeal to environmental concerns. You can appeal to everyone does, you can appeal to those emotional substories like, well, everyone deserves clean water, so we need to take action. And it's all, the same thing over and over again. Um, oh, it's artificial scarcity. Again, it's just this system of artificial scarcity that is totally bogus. And has no legitimacy whatsoever, and that's how the whole system functions. Um, then there it is. California can also show the way for other drought-endangered states in the Southwest to do the same. So again, California starts it, then they apply the model elsewhere. And you gotta love this. Like many other places, California has traditionally insulated its water from market forces. Uh, yes, probably a good idea, by preventing its sale outright or by imposing steep transaction costs and other barriers. Its underused water market operates without transparent pricing or simple and consistent rules. So there again, they're appealing to that idea of transparent pricing. We need to establish transparent pricing. We need that spot price to be, something that can be easily accessed on the market on your smartphone. And then they talk about how Australia has become the model for other countries. Blah 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 blah. Let's see. What's interesting too is the way this is taking place in Texas, and T. Boone Pickens has been very open about how he is buying up as much water rights as he can, because Texas is interesting. It's the only state where there's a capture law. Now you can imagine this going back to oil, right? Where the ground level itself, the rights to that land are separate from what is underneath that. So anybody can drill to the underlying land, and anything that they take out of there is then their own. It doesn't go to the person anyone that might might own the top of the land. though surface water belongs to the state, a landowner can pump whatever water he finds below the land. It's called the rule of capture. He can pump as much as he wishes and sell it to whoever wants it, wherever they are, no matter if he dries up his own water and his neighbor's water along with it. Um, and so this is very interesting. What's taking place in Texas is, they go on to say that not only is T. Boone Pickens, pumping out all of the aquifers on his land, but then you have even like the Canadian River Municipal Water Authority buying up thousands of acres to develop water fields, right? And now, of course, they'll say that they're doing it to preserve it, and they're not going to tap it for like 25 years. Yeah, that's what it says right there. Or I guess that's what the city of Amarillo did when they bought 71,000 acres to mine. I mean, just the fact that they're mining water, it's crazy. So when you go down into the article, they're kind of detailing how in this race to pump out all of this water and then store it and then sell it to really sell it to the Texas Triangle that they're building as the mega region down there. And you can see that in that process, if as they deplete these aquifers in the rural areas in the surrounding land, well, agriculture won't be viable there. No one will want to live there, and they'll be forced to migrate into the Texas Triangle mega region or just move somewhere else. So they're accomplishing two things with the same policy, and they accomplish multiple things with everything that they do. But it's just fascinating what's taking place right now. It really is. You can, and I mean, Willem Boyder told you. Oh, and I didn't even mean to click on this, but you can see how, like, speaking of other agendas taking place, then you have articles like this come out. Los Angeles used cloud seeding to boost rain from El Nino storms. Now, obviously, they're not talking about actual weather modification chemtrail or cloud trail programs where the clouds are actually created. This is an article kind of like, nudging people over to that reality with an article about how, we've been in this drought. Now we've got this rain from El Nino. So let's try a little cloud seeding to boost the rain, right? And so they just say that they're seeding existing clouds and not creating them on their own, like creating the fucking atmosphere like they're doing with the chemtrail program and manipulating the atmosphere. Oh, and by the way, if you go look, I mean, let's just say that it's very coincidental that California would have experienced, and Australia, that California would have experienced this drought when it did. Pretty convenient timing considering the way that all of this United Nations Agenda 21 stuff is being rolled out, right? So you can go look at satellite photos and you can see how, various systems that normally would produce rainfall were kind of steered away from California over the years. There's definitely examples of this. So, it's a little too hyperbolic to say that this was a totally artificially created drought, I think, because there are droughts that happen. Now, maybe, you can go you can go out in permutations from that and say, well, maybe there was a natural drought for a year or two and they extended it a little bit, or, whatever. You can, most definitely there is some weather modification taking place here that is contributing to these quote unquote natural droughts. And I just thought it was interesting how they put this picture here, right? Now, somebody would just say, oh, yeah, well, this is somebody who's experiencing rain and they're really happy because it's been a drought and they're just like so excited to see the rain. But really what they're doing is, subliminally, subconsciously, they're associating cloud seeding with this feeling, right? Like, oh, yeah, look at, this is great. And then eventually it'll come out that we're geoengineering too, and who knows what they'll do to say that. I mean, they'll say, well, there's been articles leaked about that already too, that, oh, maybe we should be geoengineering to stop climate change, right? So they've already floated that out there a little bit. I think it's only a matter of time before it just becomes, well, look at the fucking X-Files, man. They just straight up talked about chemtrails on that show, in addition to every other, you know, conspiracy that you can find on Infowars out there. That was just pathetic, by the way. That X-Files reboot was disgusting. Anyway, um, so you know, he's telling you the truth, man. Willem Boyder, he knows what's up, and it's kind of frightening. It's just insane what they're going to do to water. Um, I can only imagine how this is going to look when they eventually complete it. You know, so it's really easy to get lost in, you know, the fake news, right? But this is real shit that's going down, and if you are, you know, if you're in that mindset where you want to take action, I mean, well, go get involved in your local city council. Go listen to what they're saying and raise objections to it, challenge them, you know. That's something that you could do, you could really do, that would be, you know, beneficial, because that's how they're going to do it, man. There's no question about it. I don't remember where which article it was in, but they straight up just came out and said that, like, well, this is better implemented at the state level because those pesky local governments might actually want to protect their water supplies and their water rights, you know. Um, so just crazy times. It really is. Every day I I look at this situation and it just becomes more and more wild. And again, you know, this is it, right? Like they've already, the information's already out there about how they're going to churn the cap and trade systems and trading of carbon into this subprime derivative industry. And you can already see that in California too, where they imposed a fucking global warming tax for fuel, right? Which was a part of their cap and trade program. It's just it's it's total bullshit. There's no other way around it. Um, but yeah, I'll leave it there. I think water is something that everybody should be paying attention to, because this is the next big thing that they're coming after, um, and everybody should be aware of it.